In the world of outlaw motorcycle clubs, the Notorious crew emerged from a split in the Nomads MC. The Nomads had punched above their weight and built a strong reputation across New South Wales. But under new leadership, the Parramatta chapter broke the bikie tradition. They ditched the Harleys, filled the ranks with a new wave of recruits, and plunged the club into violence that would tear it apart from within. That move split the Nomads in half, and soon the club was at war with itself. Shootings, firebombings, and public ambushes. When it was all said and done, a new name was on the streets, carving out their own piece of Sydney's underworld. This is the story of the Notorious MC. To understand how the Notorious MC appeared on the scene in Australia, we first need to rewind back to the origins of the Nomads Motorcycle Club. The Nomads kicked off in Newcastle, Australia in 1968, right in the thick of the country's biker boom. Unlike many MCs that broke away from existing clubs or carried in overseas banners, the Nomads weren't imported and were actually founded in Australia. A nomad usually means a member without a fixed chapter, no city on the back patch, just the word Nomads. Some were based in towns too small for a chapter, some acted as scouts for new ones, and others just preferred riding solo. But they still carried full membership and were welcome in any clubhouse they rolled into. And the patch they wore, the winged helmet skull over pistons, started spreading like wildfire from Sydney to Adelaide. By the time the 80s hit, they had gained a strong reputation, especially around Sydney's inner suburbs and Newcastle. They weren't the largest club compared to the Rebels or Bandidos, but they punched above their weight in terms of influence and violence, even considered one of the toughest Sydney-based clubs, going head-to-head against the others. As the years went on, internal tensions would explode, not just through rival motorcycle clubs, but within the Nomads themselves. The club's influence drifted from the open roads into the neon-lit chaos of Sydney's King's Cross. Now, King's Cross wasn't just another nightlife district. It was the beating heart of Sydney's underworld, a strip of flashing signs, smoky clubs, and a never-ending supply of drugs, dealers, and desperate people. If you wanted power in the Cross, you needed muscle, and the Nomads provided plenty of it. It's here that a name kept surfacing: Hassan Sam Ibrahim. Alongside his brother John, Sam was knee-deep in nightclub ownership during the mid-1990s. On the surface, it was business. But according to allegations aired during the Wood Royal Commission, those clubs were seen as pipelines feeding Sydney's drug trade. Sam's orbit overlapped constantly with the Nomads, especially their national president at the time, Greg Craig. The two worked hand in hand to keep operations running smoothly, with the Nomads controlling street-level security around the nightclubs in King's Cross. The relationship grew so tight that in July 1997, Craig did something no old-school biker could have imagined. He handed the Parramatta chapter of the Nomads over to Sam Ibrahim. That was the moment everything shifted. According to the Sydney Morning Herald, Ibrahim didn't just become president. He flipped the script on how things had always been done. When Craig handed him control, Ibrahim apparently bypassed the old probationary steps. He didn't go through prospecting, long nominee periods, or the traditional vetting. Suddenly, the club dropped its riding requirements. Owning a bike was no longer essential to wear the patch, and for an outlaw motorcycle club, that was unthinkable. With the doors wide open, Ibrahim allegedly filled the ranks with his loyalists, turning the Granville clubhouse into a melting pot of Lebanese, Turkish, Egyptian, and Islander men, many of whom had never previously had a shot at joining a traditional motorcycle club. Almost overnight, the Parramatta chapter stopped looking like a traditional MC and started moving more like a street gang. Sam Ibrahim's takeover didn't sit well with the others, and the angriest critics weren't outsiders. They were his own brothers in the Nomads. The club had built a reputation across New South Wales, and for many, watching the Parramatta crew toss decades of tradition was unforgivable. The Newcastle chapter pushed back the hardest. They wanted the national leadership to step in and to hold a vote to decide if Ibrahim's new rules even counted. But that decision never came, because before it could, the club split into open warfare, bombs, shootouts, and tit-for-tat retaliation. Now that takes us to September 12, 2004, when the Newcastle clubhouse expected a sit-down. Instead, 3 Nomad members walked in. Inside that clubhouse, the violence was brutal. Newcastle's sergeant-at-arms was shot through both knees. Another member, Mark Christie, took bullets to the legs. A third was bashed so badly, his jacket and Nomads ring were stripped off him, a humiliation worse than the beating itself. This was Nomads tearing each other apart. Investigators recovered a .22 caliber round, .45 casings, clothing soaked in blood, and even trails of blood running down the driveway and pooling around the bikes parked outside. What began as an internal beef was now a full-blown criminal case. After the smoke cleared, the club fell silent. For a while, it looked like the feud had burned itself out. But just 2 years later, in 2006, the silence broke when Newcastle member Dale Campton flipped. Out of the life and working with police, he laid everything on the table: who showed up, what was said, and who pulled the trigger. He identified Parramatta President Sam Ibrahim, member Paul Griffin, and National President Scott Orrock as being at the Newcastle clubhouse that day. That testimony gave investigators exactly what they needed. By December 2006, the raids began. Police hit Parramatta hard, arresting Sam Ibrahim, Scott Orrock, and Paul Griffin for the 2004 ambush. With Ibrahim behind bars, the Parramatta chapter effectively collapsed. But the gap didn't stay empty for long. Before anyone could blink, a new crew appeared, made up of familiar faces, but with none of the old rules. That crew called themselves Notorious MC. Notorious carried the look of a bikie club, the patches, the colors, but that's where the similarities stopped. Motorcycles weren't part of the picture. To old-school bikies, it was a joke, but Notorious were violent and ready to carve up a piece of Sydney's underworld. Notorious first came together under former Nomads members who'd once been recruited by Sam Ibrahim. Some accounts claim it was Todd O'Connor, a Parramatta Nomad from the early 2000s, who actually pulled the group together. But most media reports credit Alan Sarkis as the founder and president. Depending on which version you believe, Sarkis either built the club from the start or stepped in down the line. Tensions with the Nomads were obvious from the start. Their Granville clubhouse was firebombed, and National President Scott Orrock's tattoo shop was sprayed with bullets. Orrock himself wasn't exactly keeping things quiet either. In 2012, he walked into a police station demanding they move a paddy wagon parked outside his tattoo shop, convinced it made him look like an informant. When they didn't, he smashed the window, poured alcohol inside, and set the vehicle on fire. He was later sentenced to prison for the stunt and ordered to pay more than $60,000 in damages. In March 2007, Notorious landed on the police radar for the first time. Rugby league stars Jared Hayne and Mark Gasnier were involved in a brawl with Notorious members at Sydney's King's Cross, where a Notorious member fired gunshots towards them. The rugby league stars were at the wrong place at the wrong time. Then came October 2008. A high-ranking member of Notorious narrowly escaped with his life after a bomb tore through his $90,000 luxury car outside his Lane Cove apartment. Only weeks later, things escalated again. On October 5th, Todd O'Connor was executed in a backstreet with 10 bullets from 2 different guns. According to the Sydney Morning Herald, Notorious was already locked in disputes with rival bikie clubs for control of the drug trade around King's Cross and Oxford Street. O'Connor was a well-known King's Cross nightclub identity with deep ties to Sydney's underworld. Amid all this chaos, the courts finally wrapped up the case from years earlier. Ibrahim, Orrock, and Griffin were acquitted in October 2008 over the 2004 Nomads Newcastle clubhouse ambush. Police long suspected that Sam Ibrahim was the engine behind Notorious, but he denied it, saying he was retired, done with that life, and wanted to be left alone. In February 2009, the Hells Angels clubhouse in Petersham was bombed, and a tattoo shop was sprayed with bullets. Police suspected that these attacks were carried out by Notorious. Just weeks later, on February 27th, a group of masked men stormed the Nomads Sydney chapter clubhouse in Marrickville. Wearing balaclavas, they shot 3 Nomads in the legs and lower torso before fleeing the building. Another incident police suspected was linked to Notorious. Now you might be asking, why were the Hells Angels and Bandidos suddenly caught in the crossfire? It all goes back to the Nomads split. The Nomads had been loose allies with the Hells Angels for years, so when the Parramatta chapter fractured and Notorious was born, the feud between the Nomads and Notorious naturally pulled the Hells Angels into the fight. At the same time, when the Parramatta Nomads chapter folded, plenty of members didn't stick with Notorious. They jumped ship to the Parramatta Bandidos instead. According to police sources, part of that split came from resentment over the new direction of the club and the influx of younger Middle Eastern members. members. The old guard, many of whom carried symbols tied to far-right politics, felt the traditions of the biker world had been thrown aside. Even though many members of Notorious and the Bandidos had known each other from the Nomads, the split turned them into rivals, and they clashed immediately, fighting for turf in King's Cross and fueling an even larger war across Sydney's underworld. Notorious's rapid rise and aggressive style didn't sit well with anyone, and very few clubs welcomed them. By March 2009, a drive-by targeted the home of Mahmoud Dib, the sergeant-at-arms of the Bandidos Blacktown chapter, and police suspected Notorious. Then, on March 20th, relatives of Notorious members came under fire in Doonside and Prospect, believed to be retaliation by the Bandidos. 2 days later, more drive-by shootings in Auburn left 2 men in hospital after the Bandidos discovered their own associates had been feeding Notorious members target addresses. Then, on March 29th, police found an unexploded homemade bomb outside the Granville home of Mustafa Juaid, president of the Bandidos Parramatta chapter. Tension was already high in Sydney's outlaw motorcycle scene when on the 22nd of March 2009, a violent brawl erupted at Terminal 3 of Sydney Airport. The Comancheros and Hells Angels clashed in a fight involving 10 people, leaving Anthony Zervas, the brother of a Hells Angel, dead. Notorious MC weren't involved, but the incident set the tone for the year ahead and drew intense police attention to all the clubs. Just days later, New South Wales Police moved in, launching Strikeforce Raptor to stamp out the escalating violence. By June 2009, the war had hit even closer to home. Fadi Ibrahim, the brother of Sam Ibrahim, was shot 5 times while sitting in his Lamborghini outside his Castle Cove home. He was left in a coma for several weeks, and no one was ever charged over the attack. The shooting would later spark further chaos as Fadi, his brother Michael, and others were charged with conspiring to kill John Macris, believing he was behind the attack, though those charges were eventually dropped. It was also at the end of that year that former Nomads president Scott Orrock patched into the Hells Angels, taking along with him many members from the Nomads. This strained the relationship between the two clubs, and the very next day, Scott Orrock's Toyota was torched. By May 2010, Jihad Murad, a senior member of Notorious, and his girlfriend found themselves in a hail of bullets at a traffic light. 12 shots tore into their car, but both survived. Police quickly suspected the Comancheros were behind the attack, who were Notorious's ongoing rivals in Sydney's underworld. In August of that year, Hamid Ullah Dastagir, wearing a Notorious jumper, allegedly stabbed 21-year-old Giovanni Focarelli outside his father's tattoo parlor in Adelaide. Witnesses claimed Focarelli said that Notorious got him as he stumbled inside. In December, a tattoo parlor owned by Comanchero National President Duax Ngakuru and Mark Buddle was firebombed. Notorious were prime suspects. A month later, Sam Ibrahim himself was shot in the legs outside his parents' Maryland's home. By March 2012, New South Wales Police officially declared Notorious MC finished. When Strikeforce Raptor kicked off in 2009, investigators mapped out the scene and singled out the members most likely to fuel violence. 4 of the top 8 high-risk players belonged to Notorious, making the gang a primary target. Police moved methodically, dismantling Notorious MC's leadership over the next few years. By mid-2011, the 4 main figures were behind bars, leaving the gang effectively neutralized by 2012. Sergeant-at-Arms Jihad Murad and his brother Saber were flagged as non-citizens, leading to Saber's deportation in June 2016, and Jihad set to follow after completing his sentence. Strikeforce Raptor also hit the wider bikie scene hard. Over 3 years, 1,696 bikies were arrested on 3,857 charges. Authorities seized 387 firearms, $2.2 million in cash, and illegal drugs, while shutting down 4 drug labs. That's it for this one. Make sure to leave a comment down below on what you'd like to see next. See you next time.